In a world that could only be described as the truest form of hell, a young girl found herself trapped in a dark underground prison, surrounded by others who, like her, lived in constant fear of death or worse. The guards who kept them captive were cruel and indifferent, their eyes dead to the suffering they inflicted. One fateful day, a guard approached the cell, a sickening grin on his face as he unlocked the bars. He announced with a mocking tone that His Excellency, Mr. Marquis, had finally arrived. The girls inside the cell exchanged fearful glances, unsure of what this visit might mean. The Marquis entered the dungeon, a man of clear status, but his expression betrayed a deep dissatisfaction with something unseen. In the brutal world outside, the strong preyed on the weak without mercy, a cruel law that governed all. The guard, noticing the Marquis's displeasure, quickly assured him that the girls were only dirty because they had not yet been washed. He promised they would be properly prepared as this was merely a prelude to the upcoming auction. The girls, trembling with terror, watched as the guard callously dragged one of them, sobbing uncontrollably, toward the Marquis. But the Marquis, his gaze wandering, abruptly stopped the guard. His eyes had fallen upon another girl, one with dark hair. Without hesitation, he pointed to her and demanded that she be brought to him instead. The girl was roughly pulled from the cell and thrown at the Marquis's feet. He smiled down at her, a cold, calculating smile, and assured her that she had nothing to fear because he would most certainly purchase her. His words were filled with a twisted satisfaction, as if he relished the despair that filled the air. He leaned closer to the girl, his voice dripping with sadistic pleasure as he confessed that nothing brought him more joy than breaking the spirits of desperate girls who tried to appear strong. The girl remained silent, her eyes betraying no emotion, until she finally removed her handcuffs with an eerie calmness and spoke in a measured tone, confirming his assumptions. The guard standing behind them suddenly collapsed to the ground, unconscious, as if struck by an invisible force. The Marquis, shocked and bewildered, turned back to the girl, only to find himself unable to finish his sentence. Before he could react, the girl had already plunged a syringe into his neck, injecting a mysterious liquid. The Marquis fell to the floor, writhing in agony, his mouth frothing as the poison took hold. The girl calmly walked to a bucket of water, soaked a rag, and returned to the Marquis. With a chilling smile, she wiped his face and whispered that she was his death. Then, without another word, she threw the keys back into the cell, giving the other girls a chance to escape. Wrapping herself in a cloak to conceal her identity, the girl left the dungeon and ventured into the stormy night. Meanwhile, when the guard awoke, he saw all the girls with weapons in their hands. A scream echoed as our heroine walked into the dark moonlit night. The rain poured down heavily as she made her way to a small shop. Inside, a man behind the counter handed her a reward, a sum of money, for her successful mission. He remarked that the Marquis's death had been ruled a heart attack, with no signs of mutilation or poisoning, just as the contract had specified. He looked at the girl with a mixture of awe and fear, acknowledging that such a task seemed almost effortless for someone of her skill. He referred to her as the goddess of death and handed her a new order, another target to eliminate in a world where power was maintained by devouring the weak. As she prepared to leave, the girl overheard a conversation between two men. One of them, staring at her silhouette, asked if she was truly the legendary assassin he had heard of. The other, skeptical, pointed out her youth. The shopkeeper warned them not to be deceived by appearances, explaining that she was a real monster who had already claimed more than a dozen lives. The bartender, watching from below, spoke grimly of a girl known for her ruthless efficiency, a girl who killed her targets without a hint of remorse. It didn't matter to her whether they were men, women, elderly, or even children, her heart was as cold as the blade she wielded. She moved from one mission to the next, indifferent to the suffering she caused, blind to the lives she shattered. The thunder rumbled overhead, and suddenly, she heard a strange sound nearby, alerting her that something or someone was following her. A small, shivering kitten perched precariously on the edge of a roof, struggling against the biting cold and relentless rain. Without hesitation, she approached it and wrapped her cloak around the tiny creature, shielding it from the downpour. The kitten, feeling warmth and dryness for the first time in hours, gazed up at her with eyes full of gratitude and relief. Yet, as the girl sat on the edge of the rooftop, the weakened structure beneath her began to give way. In an instant, she and the kitten were plunged into the abyss, the world spinning wildly as they fell. When the girl opened her eyes again, she found herself in a strange, white space surrounded by beings that resembled angels. A man of authority sat nearby, his presence imposing. The angels murmured among themselves, condemning her for the hundreds of lives she had taken. They branded her as the worst of the worst, unfit for heaven, and recommended she be cast into hell. As the verdict seemed all but decided, the kitten, who had plummeted to its death alongside her, suddenly spoke up. With a voice full of innocence and sincerity, it pleaded with the angels, explaining that this girl had saved its life. The kitten argued that despite her fearsome reputation, she had a good heart and asked the angels for mercy on her behalf. The girl, upon hearing the kitten's plea, remembered the moment she had saved it. But she quickly dismissed the idea that she was anything but monstrous, insisting that she was a terrible person with a foul temper. The kitten, undeterred, pressed on, asking if she truly wished to be condemned to hell. The girl, avoiding the kitten's gaze, replied with a chilling indifference, stating that she didn't care about her fate. She had always longed for death, but it had eluded her, leaving her trapped in an endless cycle of violence. Amused, the man on the throne laughed, curious as to how someone so hardened could have shown compassion, even if only once. He turned to the angels and suggested they assign her a new task, one that would truly test her character. In his view, she was uniquely suited for it. As he spoke, a magical light began to surround the girl, and a commanding voice echoed through the space, declaring that she must learn the power of love. The world around her faded into darkness, and for a time, she felt nothing. But soon, distant voices reached her ears, pulling her back to consciousness. She awoke in a place she didn't recognize, feeling an unfamiliar warmth and comfort. As she opened her eyes, she saw a man, his face filled with joy, calling her a sweet little angel and cradling her in his arms. He wondered aloud if it was time to feed her, and his touch was gentle, filled with a tenderness she had never known. The girl tensed, her mind racing with confusion. Where was she? What had happened? She was soon placed in a crib, and two young boys began to play around her, calling her princess and offering her toys and bottles. They asked her what she wanted, but she remained still, staring at them with an emotionless gaze, unable to comprehend this strange new world. As time passed, she slowly gathered information, realizing that her name was now Patricia von Annika, an ordinary infant barely a year old. The world she had known before had been a hellish nightmare, a place where she had destroyed countless lives. But even in death, she had not found peace. Instead, she had been reborn into what felt like an even stranger and more perplexing existence. One of the men handed her a bottle of milk, urging her to drink while it was still warm. The other insisted that she wasn't hungry and wanted to play, offering her a rattle. Patricia sat motionless, her mind flooded with memories of her past life. She realized that what she had experienced hadn't been a dream, it was all too real. Now, trapped in this new life, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions and the possibility that her journey was far from over. Her name had once been Thoth, known far and wide as the goddess of death. She was the most feared and legendary assassin, a figure shrouded in mystery and terror. But now, as Patricia von Annika, she found herself in a new life, bewildered by the sudden and inexplicable end of her previous existence. Just as she began to grapple with the strangeness of it all, a pair of warm, strong hands lifted her from the crib. The man holding her was Leonhard Wołanecki, her older brother. He held her close, sensing something was amiss. "What's the matter, little one?" he asked softly, his voice full of concern. Patricia, of course, said nothing. Her silence didn't deter him, though. He kissed her cheek and smiled, telling her how smart and beautiful she was, as always. Despite the indifferent look on her face, Leonhard assured her that she was still as sweet as ever. Soon, another man approached Gilbert, her other older brother. He gently took her from Leonhard's arms, cradling her with care. "It's obvious she just wants to cuddle," Gilbert said, kissing the top of her head. He then asked if she wanted to play, his tone light and affectionate. Despite his words, Patricia remained stoic, her mind still racing with thoughts from her past life. The two brothers continued to dote on her, unaware of the turmoil inside her. As the boys argued playfully about who would take her to visit their father, Patricia began to piece together her new reality. Leonhard and Gilbert were her brothers, and they were clearly eager to spend time with their little sister after a year apart. This was a stark contrast to the life she had known before, where she was an orphan with no family to speak of. The warmth and affection they showed her felt foreign, almost disconcerting. Then, a distant memory echoed in her mind, a voice from that strange, heavenly place telling her that she needed to learn about love. As she pondered this, Patricia realized that perhaps this new life was meant to teach her something she had never known before. But before she could delve deeper into these thoughts, her keen instincts, honed over a lifetime as Thoth, alerted her to a new danger. None of them noticed the figure sneaking onto the veranda, a man armed and intent on harm. He moved silently, carefully opening the veranda door and slipping into the room. Patricia, lost in thought, suddenly remembered the sharp hairpin in Gilbert's uniform. Moving swiftly and silently, she snatched it and spun around, just in time to see the intruder preparing to strike. Without hesitation, she hurled the hairpin with deadly accuracy. The makeshift weapon struck the man in the eye before he could lay a hand on her brothers. The would-be assassin staggered back, clutching his face in agony, trying to stifle his scream to avoid detection. Blood poured from his wound as he stumbled toward the edge of the veranda. Patricia watched in stunned silence as the man lost his balance and tumbled over the side, disappearing into the night. The heavy thud of the man's fall broke the silence in the room, drawing the attention of her brothers. Gilbert was the first to notice something was amiss. He walked over to the window, puzzled. "When did we open this?" "It's supposed to stay closed so Patricia doesn't catch a cold," he murmured, quickly shutting it. As he did, his eyes fell on his uniform, and he realized his brooch was missing. "Where did my brooch go?" His brother turned to him with a look of alarm, questioning whether he had left her near Patricia. Gilbert assured him that he was fully aware of the potential danger and would never do such a thing. Though he admitted the situation was strange, he had only hooked it earlier that morning. Lienhart, cradling his sister, gently laid her back in bed, wondering if she had armed herself for self-defense. The boy nodded in agreement, prompting his brother to suggest they search for her together, as it might indeed be too risky. As Patricia lay quietly in her crib, she watched them move away, smiling to herself as they left. The boys, turning back briefly, smiled at her and said their goodbyes. Gilbert, before exiting, asked her to behave and rest well. Once they closed the door behind them, the girl was filled with happiness, relieved that they had finally gone. Finally, she was alone. The moment her eyes closed, she found herself transported to that same mysterious place above the heavens. There, she saw the man who had sent her into this strange, new world. His presence was as enigmatic as before, and Patricia could feel the weight of unfinished business between them. The man, standing before her in this ethereal space, gazed down at the infant Patricia and greeted her with a mocking smile, calling her goddess of death in a tone dripping with sarcasm. Patricia's mind quickly pieced together who this figure was, and as recognition flickered in her eyes, the man, pleased with her reaction, remarked that it seemed she had regained her memories. His smile widened as he continued, suggesting that there was no point in delaying their conversation with unnecessary details. He declared that she was destined to save the kingdom in which she had been reborn, a kingdom teetering on the brink of collapse. Her formidable killing skills, he insisted, would be the key to saving not just the realm, but also the lives of its inhabitants. Patricia, hearing this, was taken aback. How could she possibly fulfill such a task when she was merely an infant, unable even to speak? The confusion on her face was clear, and the man, noticing her bewilderment, waved his hand and used his magic to lift her into the air. He floated her over to a large toy bear, casually tossing her onto it as if to emphasize her helplessness. He then explained that the kingdom she was born into was destined to collapse, just as it had in her previous life. The era she now lived in was 200 years before her original time, a period when this kingdom was still standing but dangerously close to its downfall. The man continued, explaining that in her previous life, the kingdom had long been forgotten, reduced to ruins after years of neglect and destruction. Patricia, unable to speak, mumbled something unintelligible in her baby voice. But the man, with his omnipotent abilities, understood her question. What does all this mean? He confirmed her fears, explaining that members of the royal family were destined to be wiped out, one, by assassins. Their downfall was sealed by their naivety and lack of caution. Eventually, war would be declared, and the kingdom would be lost to history. This, he stated, was their predetermined fate, one that needed to be altered. He went on to explain that although he, as an angel, could not interfere directly, he needed her help to change this destiny. Patricia, feeling a surge of anger, retorted that even as the so-called goddess of death, she couldn't alter fate. The man, still smiling, countered that it was precisely because she was the goddess of death that she had the power to influence the world so profoundly. He insisted that she needed to grow stronger, not just physically, but also in her understanding of the world and the forces that governed it. The man revealed that her new beginning was, in fact, a punishment for the countless lives she had taken in her past life. He reminded her that she was not omnipotent, and this new life was an opportunity to atone for her sins. Patricia, far from pleased with this revelation, argued that she was still human, not some all-powerful being. After a moment of reflection, the man agreed, acknowledging that this was indeed the crux of the problem. It was essential to him that she understood this, and so he had devised a plan. He pointed out that despite her hardened exterior, she had shown compassion by saving a freezing, lonely kitten. This act, however small, indicated that her soul was still capable of goodness. He told her that her soul could heal if given the chance to experience love, something she had never truly known. Because she was still young, he urged her to behave appropriately for her age, to control her mental faculties and, most importantly, to use her lethal skills to protect the family she now belonged to. In doing so, she could prevent the kingdom's destruction. Patricia listened in silence, then let out a heavy sigh. She admitted that the man was incredibly annoying to her, but she couldn't deny that his words held some weight. After a moment, she asked if he had changed much since their last encounter, hinting at her memories of him from before. The man, now visibly indignant, puffed up with pride and insisted that she should show him respect because he was, after all, an angel. But Patricia, pulling back, responded coldly that she had no reason to heed his words. The angel, trying to regain control of the conversation, argued that just because she had regained her memories from her past life didn't mean she should forget everything from her current one. He pressed her, asking if she would really be content to let her new family die, simply because she refused to protect them. His words struck a chord with Patricia, who fell into deep thought. After a long pause, she confessed that she truly didn't understand what love was. The angel, seeing a glimmer of hope in her admission, gently explained that understanding love wasn't something that could be forced or easily taught. It was something she would need to discover for herself, through the bonds she would form with the people around her in this life. But as he saw the indifferent look on her face, a wave of disappointment washed over him. Still, he knew she had no choice in the matter. With a resigned sigh, he turned away and waved his hand dismissively, stating that whether she liked it or not, she was bound to fulfill her duty. She, who had never known love, must learn to protect it with all her strength. Patricia, taken aback by his words, wanted to protest, to negotiate somehow, but before she could, the angel spoke one last time. He told her that once she completed this mission, she would be granted her freedom. Then, without giving her a chance to respond, he sent her back to the world below. When Patricia opened her eyes, she was no longer in the ethereal realm but back in her crib, in the room she now called home. But something was terribly wrong. A shadow loomed over her, and she realized that a man was standing there, a knife in hand, ready to strike. Instincts honed from a past life kicked in immediately. Without a second thought, she grabbed the pillow beside her and hurled it at the intruder, momentarily blinding him. In that brief moment, Patricia slipped out of sight. Moving swiftly and silently, she circled around the man and, with precise skill, pressed a pressure point on his shoulder, causing him to collapse, unconscious. Sitting atop his back, Patricia took a moment to process what had just happened. The reality was clear: the lives of the royal family were indeed in grave danger, and by extension, so was hers. But now, confined to a baby's body, she was also bound by several restrictions. First, she couldn't commit suicide or engage in any actions that would lead to her death. Second, she was forbidden from revealing her past life to anyone. And third, she couldn't disclose the true nature of her mission. These restrictions were more than just rules, they were shackles on her soul, and breaking them was not an option. She despised these limitations, feeling the weight of them as if they were branded into her very being. With a sigh, Patricia acknowledged the enormity of the task ahead. She was expected to save a kingdom on the brink of destruction, protect a family targeted by assassins, and she had to do all this before she turned 12. The timeline was tight. On her 12th birthday, the kingdom was fated to fall. Although she cared little for the kingdom itself, The promise of freedom after completing the mission was enough to compel her to see it through. Frustration welled up inside her. The reward seemed paltry for the effort required, and she resented the fact that she was once again being assigned a mission with such poor compensation. Yet, a dark determination settled in her heart. Once she completed this task, she would find a way to kill the angel who had thrust this burden upon her. As she sat on the unconscious assassin, her mind wandered back to moments from her past life, memories of relentless pursuit and merciless killings. She recalled one man who had foolishly believed he could escape her. But he had underestimated her, failing to realize that she could climb walls and strike with lethal precision. She had caught up to him swiftly, slashing his body until he crumpled to the ground, defeated. He had never understood who he was up against. Now, in her new life as Patricia, those memories clashed with the present. When her mother entered the room, calling for her with open arms, Patricia's irritation flared. The woman's gentle, loving demeanor was alien to her, and she couldn't comprehend why this woman expected her to respond like a normal child. A nervous smile tugged at her lips as she struggled to mask her true feelings. Lawrence, Patricia's father, spoke up, expressing concern that it might be too early for her to start walking. He pointed out that it was clear she was struggling just to stand on her own, yet her mother, Julia, was already coaxing her to take her first steps. Julia laughed, brushing off his worries, and teasing him for being too protective of their daughter, especially when he had been much stricter with Leon and Gilbert. Lawrence sighed, admitting that Patricia's delicate appearance made him more anxious than he'd been with his sons. "She's so tiny, so fragile," he murmured, watching as Patricia leaned against the crib for support. "It's as if she's a perfect gift from the gods, and I just want to keep her safe." Julia agreed, her love for Patricia evident in her every word and action. Despite their royal status, it was clear that they adored their daughter. Patricia, listening to their conversation, began to grasp that these people were her parents, the king and queen of the kingdom of Sharon. Her family also included her two older brothers, Leon and Gilbert. Her mission was to protect these four individuals from harm, a task entirely new and foreign to her, as she had spent her past life taking lives, not saving them. Lawrence suddenly remarked that Patricia seemed to be learning to walk much earlier than her brothers had. Julia smiled, clearly touched that he remembered such details, and as she approached Patricia, she added that their daughter seemed to grow cuter with every attempt to stand, even if it was a struggle. The girl grew increasingly irritated by the endless stream of cutesy remarks and the sight of succulence everywhere, to the point where she even entertained thoughts of lashing out at her parents. Soon after, she found herself sitting on the floor, realizing with some surprise that she could now move with ease. Patricia speculated that the absurd entity she knew as God must have altered her body, giving her unexpected strength. Although it was difficult to gauge just how much she had changed, she was certain that she could walk comfortably and even outpace her parents. This newfound power left her feeling a twinge of regret, as she was forced to maintain the guise of a helpless infant, which limited her autonomy. Just as these thoughts swirled in her mind, her mother approached, scooped her up, and mused aloud whether her daughter was already tired. She then gently kissed Patricia's forehead, apologizing and explaining that it was time for her afternoon nap, a routine that had not been abandoned. As her mother carried her to the bedroom, Patricia lay on the bed, watching as her mother lingered by her side, seemingly lost in thought. Patricia struggled to understand the concept of love her parents professed, finding it elusive and intangible, especially since they rarely shared meals or moments of genuine connection. Time passed in a haze until Patricia, seeking solitude, ventured out onto the veranda. With her memories of a past life fully restored, she came to a startling realization: her room, located in the vast castle, was the easiest to access, making her, a mere infant, the most vulnerable target for an assassin. The river running below her balcony presented a convenient means to dispose of bodies and weapons, a thought that now seemed disturbingly routine. Patricia even speculated that God's protection had shielded her until she regained her memories, which explained the seemingly endless string of would-be murderers she had encountered over the past year. Whenever Patricia eliminated another threat, she would discard the poison she used and reflect on the peculiar burden of being a target. Her parents' overprotectiveness, born from a near-fatal incident, only heightened their concern for her safety. Patricia wondered if demonstrating her speed and agility might reassure them, but she hesitated, fearing that revealing her abilities could lead to her being cast out of the household. One day, her mother entered the room carrying a plate of sweets, intending to offer Patricia an afternoon snack. However, upon seeing Patricia calmly sitting atop a lifeless body, her mother was so shocked that she stammered, dropping the plate, which shattered upon hitting the floor. Overcome with fear for her daughter, she rushed to her side, scooping her up and angrily confronting the assailant, demanding how he could harm a child who was barely able to walk. Patricia, unsettled by the strange emotions coursing through her, instinctively squirmed out of her mother's arms and distanced herself, unable to fully comprehend the situation. Her mother, Yulia, was simultaneously astonished and overjoyed to see Patricia walking on her own. She proudly declared her daughter a genius, marveling at how quickly she had adapted in the years since her rebirth as a princess.